Bishop e3. Bishop e3 is, I think, in practice, a very common move here. It's comparable to the Pirc, where they play g6. It's a very common plan. They can play queen d2 and castle queenside. Here we have a move that's only played in 5% of games, but I think is very effective, and it scores 53% in the chess database, and in the Masters database scores 56%. And it's used by Akobian and Flores, so it's still played by some strong players. We also have Aaron Summerscale as well. With it being played by only 5% of players in this position as black, we combine that with how rare the Czech Pirc is in general, then you can see that we're almost certainly going to be much better prepared than your opponent. So we have 3 or 4 typical plans here. First is to pressurize b2, which we probably are not going to take unless you have a tactical reason to, because white can get some pressure along the b file. But it's worth noting, if white, say for example, moves his queen here and just blunder a piece, queen takes b2. Also, another plan here is to play knight g4, which can really annoy this bishop. We also have ideas potentially playing g6 in certain scenarios, as well as just knight d7 and eventually e5. Against pretty much any response by white here, we're going to be playing knight g4. So the most common responses in the database here are queen d2 or rook b1, just defending the pawn, or even queen c1, again defending this pawn. Now if your opponent plays just a natural move like, I don't know, knight f3, then we just proceed with knight g4, and it's going to end up in a better version of the other lines for us, because we're pressurizing this bishop, and when they move the bishop, you're going to play e5. So for example, they can get in some trouble if they play this, just play e5. Can't take, so we've got checkmate on f2, and it can be quite dangerous for them. So I play this in my own games actually. So here, I tend to find queen d2. It's been the most popular response against me. As you can see here, we score pretty well though. So let's look at what we do against queen d2. I think queen d2 is probably the most likely move you're going to play against, because they're essentially just playing the normal moves against the normal Pirc, and they're just treating the Czech Pirc as if it's a normal Pirc. So you have some choices here. You can either take on b2, which I'm not going to recommend. I'm going to recommend just knight g4 here. The main point is that if they move the bishop, we're going to go e5. So let's say go bishop g5, let's play e5 here. And this is quite nice for us. And if they go bishop f4, same thing. But most of your opponents are probably going to castle queenside. And here, we just snap off this bishop. That'll take back. And we have some nice options here, I think. e5 is fairly consistent for the way we play in this repertoire. But g6 is also possible, because we have this bishop. So we've got the bishop pair, so it makes some sense to play on the dark squares, because they don't have the bishop to defend. Let's say we play e5, knight f3, and it's bishop g4. I think we're doing pretty well here. Now, according to the Masters database here, the most common response is actually to play either a3 or rook b1, neither of which we need to be too worried about. So let's say they play rook b1, just defending this pawn. So now, obviously, we don't have to worry about castling queenside. So we can just do our plan that we do against pretty much everything in this line. Just go knight g4. You can see here, black scores pretty well, 100%. Chess database slightly, but we're still doing pretty well. We're essentially going to play e5 against everything when they move the bishop, and you know, if it's a bullet game, they take this, we got checkmate on f2. If they defend this bishop, say queen d2, just swap it off, and again e5. So we've got the bishop pair, we're actually slightly better. So if they play a3, it's really important to note that you can't take this pawn anymore because of knight a4 trapping our queen. So let's just show this, because it's been fallen for before by Czech Pirc players. So obviously here we've lost our queen. It's quite an annoying trap. But seeing as in most lines that I'm recommending, we're not actually going to try and take this pawn anyway. We just go knight g4, and here again we're going to play, and their bishop moves, we're going to play e5. If they defend this bishop, we're just going to take it off, and we'll get a good game with the same idea of e5 afterwards. So many players here are going to play a move like bishop c1, but after e5 here, you can see black's doing pretty well. So let's say knight f3, knight d7, and yeah, I think these positions are quite comfortable for black, really. So here's a game by akobian, where his opponent reacted to knight g4 here by going right the way back to c1. You can see akobian just played e5, got a really nice, easy position, and you know, he went on to win quite comfortably in the end. So going back to this position, some of you may be wondering what we do against something that stops our plan of knight g4. Now this is the only time where we're actually going to take on b2. So for example, if they play f3, h3, bishop e2, essentially stopping us playing knight g4 next move, then we have to take on b2. So let's say f3, and then we'll take on b2. So the engine thinks we're doing pretty well here. So white has some tactical issues here because he can't really defend the way he wants with queen d2. So we just take the knight or the rook if he defends the way he wants. And so knight e2 is the likely move you're going to face. Then here we can see we're minus 0.3. We can either play queen a3, queen b6, queen b4. I'm guessing just queen a3. We can get this queen back to c7 if we have to quite easily without any risk. We're essentially just a pawn up. We can probably follow up with e5, knight d7, bishop e7, castles. So it should be pretty good for black. Likewise, h3 again. Take this. Same issue for white as before. We can just do the same thing. Now, if white plays something like e5 here, just make sure you don't take back, because then we've got potentially a double threat on f6 and the queen. That's not ideal. Just remember, if they play that, to go knight g4, and actually white's in quite a bit of trouble here because we're threatening this, threatening this. Also, if they play a move like queen d2, then b2 looks quite weak. So let's say we takes, and now we can take this, and this pawn looks weak. And yeah, white's quite a bit worse. Now against bishop g5, the other bishop move, I'm going to be recommending we go knight d7. So white here is probably going to go for either queen d2 and castle queenside, or f4 and a quick e5. Neither of them particularly effective against us. I'm going to be recommending we play in the style of akobian, his choices here, and I'm going to see in one of the games him getting quite a quick victory when their opponent tried to attack a little too hastily. So just knight d7. Now here, most players are going to play queen d2, or perhaps f4, or maybe even knight f3. Let's look at queen d2. Now the main move, e5, fairly consistent with our repertoire. And if we look at this game quickly, knight f3, this is an attempt by white to attack black very fast, but you can see this attempt to go for a queenside castling and a quick attack is a lot less effective against the Czech Pirc than the normal Pirc, and so already -2 here, and it's quite an easy victory for akobian actually in the end. Yeah, so going back to this position, after queen d2 we just play queen e5, and let's say they play castles queenside here, which might look a bit scary. I'm going to recommend we just play bishop e7 here. We're just going to follow up with castles, queen b5, so the engine thinks we're about equal. Let's say if they play knight f3, we're going to be slightly better, just castles. We've just seen that with akobian's game. They go for f4, which is the best move here. Just play b5. And I think white has to be pretty careful here, because this pawn on e4 is pretty weak. Get b4 in, and it's getting a little bit tactical. Let's say take here, and a lot of players are probably going to bail out into an equal ending, but if they don't, we're probably slightly better, or potentially get a few quick wins in if they allow us to get b4. So that's fine for us. And let's say they don't go for this queen d2 idea. Instead they go for f4, which looks pretty strong, because they're going to go for e5. We have this lovely move queen a5 here, and I think we're completely fine. So after queen a5, we can see that the most commonly played move is queen d2 in both masters and VHS. So e5, knight f3, bishop e7. Castle queenside's having a number of master games, and we score about 50% here with h6, bishop h4, and then take on f4. If we look at the lead chess database and see similar, And the key move is to play h6 here, and then to take on f4 if we can. So we've got g5 coming if they take the queen, and if they take on this knight, we can just take this. We're doing pretty well. Like this, probably. We can either play queen a5. Now if they try and combine bishop g5 with something else, so let's say they play knight f3 here, by far and away the most high scoring move in both the Masters and League Chess database here is e5, so we got games by strong players in the line. And if they take, we're just going to take it back. We're going to get our bishop out quite nicely. So they go bishop c4, we just go bishop e7, and we're just going to castle. Let's say castles, castles, and we're completely fine here. We can just play like queen c7 and our typical moves. So in general, if they play bishop e3 or bishop g5, we're completely fine. Just remember, if they go bishop e3, we want to try and go queen b6, and if they go bishop g5, we want to try and go knight d7. And in both cases, we're trying to follow up with e5 most times. We got a completely equal position.